Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 30 of Keeping Water. In this week's episode, I'm going to show the first stage of constructing the moving bed. It hasn't gone flawlessly, but no disasters. I'll also look at how the pond has coped with the latest cold snap and what I've done to address it. Once again, thanks to all the new and existing subscribers. I really appreciate the support and I'm really glad that I have a consistent viewership. The moving bed is the first of a few projects I have for this year, so there's going to be a lot to watch over the coming months. If you've not already, please subscribe to follow along and see how the projects, fish and my pond develop through 2021. Right, let's get started. My plan for the moving bed was that it will be in the filter shed with the multi-bay and will be the last part of the filtration system before the water returns to the pond. I've had challenges even before construction, which were around the following. 1. As always, cost. It's easy enough to source suitable tubs to make a moving bed out of, but they can be expensive, especially if you want to be sure about durability and especially in the extremes of weather. 2. It needed to be deep enough, but also, as my system is pump fed and then gravity returned, the outlet on it needs to be at the same height as the multi-bay. However, I also wanted it to be a little off the ground to help with drainage. All this meant something like a large cylindrical tub wasn't going to be suitable. 3. I only had so much space in my shed to fit it in, so on top of everything else it couldn't be too wide. Therefore, although I was quite happy with the tub I got, and it was the perfect width and length, it isn't quite as deep as I'd like, but them's the breaks, I guess. So, the plan was to have a 2-inch inlet from the multi-bay towards the bottom of the moving bed, with a long pipe from it going almost to the far end of the tub. The thinking here was to allow the water to flow against the back wall and then be spread throughout the tub and media, rather than just flow straight to the outlet. There would then be an outlet towards the top, which would take water back to the pond. At the opposite end, at the bottom, would be a 1.5-inch outlet to use for cleaning and drainage. The original plan was to have both the inlet pipe and drainage outlet below a grid, which would keep the media above both of them and allow detritus to drop from the media to the bottom of the tub. In fact, as you'll see, I do drill the inlet hole with this plan still in mind. However, I didn't quite keep to it, as you'll see as I progress through the construction. The first step was to measure up. I'd love to say I always measure twice and cut once, but I really can't. In this case, the hole is wrong, but not due to my measuring, more about the decision making I previously mentioned. More later. Here I am drilling the first 2-inch hole, which is the inlet to the filter, through which water will enter the moving bed from the multi-bay. I think it makes quite a clean cut, but I'll do some cleaning up anyway in a bit. Now, I went for a nice slow-mo here as I thought it might be a bit dramatic or at the very least interesting. That didn't really work out, but I've left it in anyway. To clean up the hole I used sandpaper. As I said, it's quite a clean cut, so didn't need to do too much. I find that light sandpaper does the job nicely while keeping the shape of the hole. The next hole is the outlet to the filter, through which water will return to the pond. Again, a nice clean cut with only a little sandpaper work needed. Next, I do a test fit of the two bulkheads, just to check that they fit nice and flush, which they do. Next, I drill the 1.5 inch waste drain hole. I think I could have gone a little lower, but I wanted to be sure that the bulkhead fitted without any issues. Here I'm making the grid to hold the media away from the bottom of the tub and help with drainage. A quick measure, and then it's relatively easy to cut the grids nice and straight, and super fast once you get the hang of it. Some more measuring and a couple more cuts and it's done. Joining the pieces together is pretty simple, as I can turn to my best friend's cable ties. I chose to use a tie along each of the holes of the grids. Not sure if this was overkill, but the result was pretty sturdy. I then just trimmed the ties for neatness and function. These grids are perfect in terms of strength and, to be honest, cost, but the holes are too big for some of the smaller media I'm likely to use in the bed. I therefore bought some smaller mesh that wouldn't be strong enough on its own, but works well in conjunction with the grid. To add it to the grid, rather than do lots of fancy measuring, I just laid a corner of the mesh over the grid, fixed it with, again, cable ties, and then cut around it afterwards. I deliberately left about an inch all the way round for a reason I'll discuss later. I think it turned out pretty good, and as you'll see, it fitted perfectly into position in the tub. The overlap of mesh was designed to cover any gaps between the grid and the tub, but as it turned out, there aren't any. On to gluing in some sections of rigid pipe into the bulkheads. They needed to be slightly staggered so they can pass by each other once connected into the rest of the system. I must admit I made an absolute meal of working this out, which I will somewhat try to cover up by fast forwarding a lot of this. Before there's any questions about the wisdom of using an old kitchen knife to start cuts in pipes, I have a really old rusty saw, and this is the best and easiest way of getting accurate straight cuts. I do some cleaning up here. I have to start with a Stanley knife before sandpaper, as my old saw makes a messier cut than my hole saws do. I then test fit the rubber 90 degrees, which I'll be using instead of solvent weld fittings, as I prefer the flexibility you have with them. Here is where I make a right mess of working out how long to make this section of rigid pipe to ensure that it passes the lower one. Eventually I get there, but it takes ages, even in fast forward. Here, I also realise that it needs to actually fit in its position in the filter shed, so I go out to the shed and check that. After much fussing about I get there, and then I can glue the pipes in. First I clean the bulkheads and the sections of pipe. Then I can apply the solvent weld glue to the inside of the bulkhead and the outside of the pipe. Insert the pipe with a twist and hold it in place for a few seconds. Then I repeat that with the second pipe. Next, I'm going to use more of the mesh to cover the inlets and outlets to prevent media from escaping the moving bed. As you'll see, I accurately guesstimate the amount I need, hold it in place and fix with some cable ties, and then cut away any excess. Definitely craftsmanship. Anyway, I didn't get a great camera angle here. You can see better on another pipe in a bit. As a brief interlude from covering pipes, I once again use cable ties for yet another purpose. This time to make some handles for lifting the grid in and out. Again, sorry for the camera angle. Back to covering pipes, and this time it's the inlet pipe. Again, just using a rough amount of mesh, attaching with 2 cable ties, and then cutting back any excess. Right, a final look. As I've suggested, I made one big mistake when making this. As I said at the beginning, I originally planned to have the inlet pipe under the grid, and indeed cut the first hole with this in mind. The result meant that the depth of the available space for the media was just too restricted, especially considering that the tub wasn't as deep as I would have liked it in the first place. The fix is to place the grid over the drainage outlet as planned and then under the inlet. This means the space below the grid is about 2 inches at the lowest end and about 4 inches at the deepest end. I think that will be okay, but time will tell. Being lower down in the narrowing tub means the grid wedges in, but I will add supports to stop the lowest end from dropping any lower. So, that's most of the initial construction complete. I'm going to glue in the drainage pipework when it's in situ, as it will be easier to work out positioning. I'm not planning to glue the inlet pipe in, as 1, it makes it easier to remove the grid, and 2, I may change it in the future. The next stage of installation will be connecting it up to the system in the filter shed, but that won't be for a couple of weeks as there's other work I'm going to do at the same time. I'm also going to complete some leak tests on the moving bed before then. Please stay tuned for future episodes to see the rest of the progress. This last week brought with it some pretty cold weather here in the UK, especially a couple of days where the forecast indicated sub-zero temperatures and a day of lots of light snow followed by a day of heavy snow. I therefore thought it a good idea to cover the pond with some tarp just to keep off as much snow as possible and reduce the inevitable drop in temperature. Unfortunately, due to changes in the heron fence, the tarp didn't reach the ground all around the pond, so I had to bodge coverage with a variety of additions, like some weed membrane. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is a really imperfect cover, and it certainly doesn't eradicate wind chill as wind still gets under it. However, its main aim is just to keep snow off, and it does that. Another bodge I added this year was to connect bungee cord to the posts. This was to prevent the heron fence from collapsing inwards under the weight of the snow, ice and or rainwater. As it turned out, there was little or no snow, although the temps had dropped below zero and stayed there for extended periods. Here in North Wiltshire, we avoided the worst of this cold spell. Many parts of the UK have had it a lot worse. At the time of making this video, we only have a couple more days of really cold temperatures before it turns more mild again, but I'm leaving the covers on until then. In spite of the sub-zero temperatures, no sign of any ice forming on the pond or in the filter, which is good. The pond temps are very low, around 2 degrees, which isn't ideal. As part of February's underwater watch, I've done some filming of the fish to see how they've behaved in these really cold temps. This will hopefully be in next week's video. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Keeping Water. I really do appreciate it. In next week's episode, we'll have February's underwater watch. I'll also outline the next stage of installing the moving bed, including what other jobs I'm going to be doing while I have the filter system somewhat dismantled. Hopefully there'll be a week of more mild temperatures, so there'll be no concerns around that to cover, but we'll see. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.